G'day, in this video I'm going to tell you all about the benefits we get as farmers and growers from soil organic carbon. And make sure to stick around to the end where we cover most of the financial benefits that we get from increasing the soil organic carbon in our soils. If this is the first video you're watching in the series, make sure to go back to the first one. This is the second video in the series. The first one we cover what exactly is soil organic carbon. You should be able to find the link to the whole course either on YouTube or you'll be able to find it on our website, and there's a lot more supplementary material, guides, and some templates in the future. Cool, so again, the course is completely free. On the website, there's actually no email opt-in. This is purely just to get a lot of information out there about soil organic carbon and what we can do to improve the fertility of our soil. Cool, so let's start off talking about what do we actually want in a soil. So if we think of a really nice soil, what is that going to do for us and our plant production? And simply, all we want to do, I guess, with our soil, all that we want our soil to have is the ability for it to grow plants with less inputs and more stability through an ever crazy climate. So we want to minimize the impact of a variable climate on our plant production. So with that, simply, we want really nice structured soil. So we want a soil that has nice structure to it. We want a soil that has a high water holding capacity. We want our soils that have a high amount of nutrients in it and the ability to exchange that nutrients. And we also want a lack of limitations. So that can be extreme pH, so either too acidic or too basic. We don't want excess, say, sodium or salinity or acidity. And we also want to make sure that our soils are biologically active, but we would get that from all these things. So when we consider, say, a soil profile like this, which I've represented in this little diagram here, a poor soil will have very poor soil aggregation on the top. This might even be a plough layer, so we've just freshly ploughed up paddock, and we get these really fine soil particles here on the top. And then we might have some limitations in the subsoil, so either compaction, where there's not much stability, where there's not much aggregation or pore space. This is going to be quite a poor soil. And so you could think about this, if we get a big rain event, the rain's definitely going to soak into here, but there's a big risk of all of this basically moving off farm and eroding away because there's no structure to it. And then all we're left with is, a subsoil with just problems. So they're going to be compacted, maybe a bit acidic, maybe a bit sodic. Not ideal for growing plants. So let's just say we didn't lose all that topsoil. Our water hopefully will come through, but it's going to hit maybe this compaction layer and then go across. So realistically, in this soil, we actually don't have that much depth that our plants can put their roots down. It might only be 10, 15 centimeters. So again, we have a little plant here. That's going to put its roots down to that compaction layer and most likely will just go to the side. So you can think about that. We actually don't have that much soil in this system because it's only 10 centimeters. And the soil that we do have is probably going to erode away. Poor structure. Now, there's a good chance that this soil is low in soil organic carbon, mostly because of the practices that we're implementing to get all these negative impacts. So keep that in mind as we go to our good soil. So our nice soil will have good aggregation. It will have the ability for airflow throughout the profile, which also means that our water can infiltrate really rapidly into our soil. So if we get a big storm event, rain's going to come in, it's not going to dislodge all these sort of particles and wash them away and lose them. It's going to be held together because of soil organic carbon, which we'll touch on in a second. And then it's going to infiltrate all throughout the soil profile, which means we get to capture a lot of water and we get to hold more in the soil. And this would contribute to having a really fertile soil. And so if we did have a plant growing there, it's going to be able to put its roots down, easily go through all these pore spaces deep into our soil profile. Now, if we were to compare the, say, rooting zone of these two soil profiles, say this got to 30 centimeters deep, whereas this one got to 10 centimeters, effectively this plant would have 3 times the amount of water available to it because it can go deeper, and the nutrients available to it, assuming that the nutrients are uniform through the top 30 centimeters. Most likely it won't be. But you can understand the importance of making sure we have a really deep soil profile, well aggregated, so that the roots, water, and air can flow right down to the bottom, or as far as it can into the soil profile. So what does soil organic carbon actually have to do with these two diagrams? Well, simply the soil organic carbon, or the practices that we use to build soil organic carbon, convert the poor soil into our good soil. And you can't really have building soil organic carbon without the practices that build it. You need to have the practices for healthy soil in order for soil organic carbon to be built. So although some practices like no-till will contribute to our good soil, and maybe not so much building soil organic carbon, we can't have soil organic carbon without good cultural management. So in the video, we're going to be talking about how soil organic carbon builds structure, how it increases water holding capacity, increases our nutrient status in our soil as well as chemical status, reduces some limitations within our soil. We're going to be talking about the biological benefits that we get from soil organic carbon, and in general, how we go from a poor soil to a really good soil. All right, let's start with the physical benefits that we can get from soil organic carbon. So typically this is going to fall into three categories. We're going to be improving our structure of our soil. Now from this we get so many benefits. So it increases our aggregate stability, or our soil stability. This is going to be very important for preventing erosion of our soil particles, so keeping that topsoil there. Soils with high amounts of soil organic carbon don't disperse as much, and so this is really important in very clayey soil, as well as soil that has a high acidicity. So it's going to keep our soil particles close together, and we're not going to lose them when we get a big storm event, preventing washouts, which is also going to mean we're going to keep our fertile topsoil. Stability is also very important to prevent sealing of the soil surface, which means we're going to maintain a really high infiltration rate. Soil tilth will be improved when we increase the structure of our soil. This is basically the ease of the soil. Almost think of like Play-Doh versus a rock. You want really nice soil tilth so that it is, spongy, and when we plant our seeds, it's a nice seed bed. Next, we're going to have good gas exchange. Basically, when we have these soil aggregates, there's a lot of pore space, macro pore space, to allow air to flow into our soil profile. And that's really important because our microbes and our roots still need air for respiration, so to live. They still need to breathe effectively. So we still need really good gas exchange for oxygen to flow in. And we also want good gas exchange, particularly for our legumes, so that nitrogen gas can flow in, which the nodules on our roots can then use. Next one, infiltration. Infiltration, again, with our large aggregates and macro pore space, water is going to really infiltrate and push down into the water profile. And root expansion. We want nice root expansion so that roots go deep into the soil profile. If they're only at the very top of the soil profile, we're not going to be accessing a lot of our stored nutrients or water. So we want our roots to go deep into our soil profile, and we can only do that when we have good structure deep into the soil profile. And so the reason why we get a improvement in structure when we have high amounts of soil organic carbon is because our soil particles, in particular our clays, basically stick to the soil organic carbon to form these aggregates. At a top level, that's effectively how it works. They clump together and they form a really nice crumbly soil. The other benefit we get is an increase in water holding capacity. Now this is not just water holding capacity, but plant available water holding capacity, which means it's water that the plant can actually extract and use. So not all the water that goes in our soil is available. Sometimes it takes way too much energy for the plant to actually pull the water off our soil. But the really good thing about our organic carbon in our soil is that almost all of it is plant available. So soil organic carbon holds about 7 times its weight in water, and if you were to do the calculations for soil organic matter, it's about 4 times its weight in plant available water holding capacity. And I've got a calculation over there that we'll run through in a second, but this is a massive benefit, and we break down the actual financials in a moment. Finally, we get a reduction in evaporation. It's a bit hard to get a very specific number on how much that is, because it really does depend on so many other soil characteristics. But effectively, soil organic carbon will buffer the temperature in our soil so it's not going to heat up as quickly, and it's going to be holding that water a bit more like a sponge. So we're going to reduce the loss of water from evaporation, which means more for our plants. So again, when we look at these two diagrams, we want a nice soil structure. It's going to allow airflow, water flow, roots to move through our profile, and we're going to hold all this water. So we're putting more water in and we're holding it. And actually that's a whole topic we'll be covering in this course about the drought benefits we get from increasing our soil organic carbon. Compared to effectively really shallow soil, we can't access a lot of the profile. This is really prone to erosion. It's not very good. So let's talk about the financial benefits. Effectively, if we go from the current around 1% soil organic carbon, typical of Australian soils, might be lower, higher depending on your area. So if we go from 1% to 3%, which is roughly the potential. So this is 3% soil organic carbon is the estimated soil organic carbon prior to settlement. That's a typical goal we could try and aim for. At 30 centimeters deep, at 1.4 grains per centimeter cube, which is our bulk density, we have about 4,200 tons of pure soil per hectare. So if we worked out the amount of carbon in our soil, it works out to be currently 42 tons, and at our improved potential soil organic carbon levels would have about 126 tons of carbon. So remember, 1 unit of soil organic carbon can hold 7 times its weight in water, which means our potential soil organic carbon is going to hold a lot of water. Depending on the units you like to use, irrigators like to use megs or megalitres. So you'll be able to hold about 0.882 megs of water. If you're a dryland farmer and we talk about rain, it's going to be the equivalent of 88.2 mils of rain. And this is all per hectare. Compared to our current, which is 0.294 megs of water or 29.4 mils. So if we improved our soil organic carbon from a level of 1% to 3%, we're effectively increasing the water holding capacity of our soils, remember only in the top 30 centimetres, by 58.8 mils. Now I say in the top 30 centimetres because with this improvement, we're going to definitely increase that more. And if we were only farming the top 10, 15 centimetres, and with the benefits that we get from soil organic carbon and the practices we use to increase that, and we can increase that to 30, maybe 50, even a metre in some areas, these benefits are just going to keep building on themselves. But anyways, so if we wanted to put a financial figure on that, we can do two things. We can look at the increase in production, and that's what we will be doing for a wheat crop. And we'll also be looking at the money that we could save, or the benefit, if we were to use basically this amount of water in irrigation. So the 2023-2024 water is about $391 to $353 per meg. Now this is just a general security, nothing too special. This additional water that we're able to capture would equal to about $230 to $200 per hectare. Now scale this across a 1,000 hectare farm and you get some pretty good returns on your soil organic carbon investment. So if we're thinking about dryland wheat or cropping, so typically for every mil increase that you have in your soil at the end of fallow, you're going to increase your wheat yields by about 8 kilos. Now remember, we increased our plant available water by 58.8 mils, which means we would be able to increase our production using this rough ballpark by 470 kilos per hectare. Now, if we were to think about that as a financial benefit, it would be about $188 per hectare, and that's using a $400 per tonne wheat price. So this really stacks up when we scale this across a big farm. And we're increasing our revenue by $188 per hectare. Across the 1,000 hectare farm, that's going to be $188,000. Now also, mind you, a lot of that's going to go straight to the bottom line because our harvesting costs are basically going to be the same. We're still running over the same area of land. So the harvesting cost is going to be the same, sowing costs are going to be the same because we're still sowing there anyways. This is all from the same, basically, plant. Although we might need to increase our fertiliser inputs to achieve this. So that might increase with that. Our herbicides and pesticides will probably stay the same because it's the same number of plants. Seed costs, all the same. So effectively, a lot of this is going straight to our bottom line because we still need to pay for a lot of those fixed costs that we're paying for anyways. So keep that in mind for the end of the video and for our drought resilience topic that we cover with the SOC course. So again, just imagine if we were able to expand from that 10 centimetre profile, 15 centimetre profile into 50 centimetre profile with the increase in soil organic carbon. So 10 centimetres at 1%, 50 centimetres at 3%. That would make a massive difference to the amount of water you can hold in your soil. And now for the chemical benefits. Now I'm going to keep the chemistry language to a very basic level. If you have taken a chemistry class, you'll know why we refer to it as chemistry, but I'll do my best. So one of the biggest benefits we get for increasing our soil organic carbon levels in our soil is the increase in cation exchange capacity, which is a fancy way of saying positively charged nutrients in our soil. The capacity of our soil to hold those positively charged nutrients, as well as our anion exchange capacity, which is the negatively charged nutrients in our soil. So the best way to think of cation exchange capacity and anion exchange capacity as a bucket. So all our soils have a bucket, but depending on the amount of soil organic carbon we have and the levels of clay and the type of clay changes the size of our bucket. So a really nice clayey soil with a high amount of soil organic carbon will have a bigger bucket to hold more nutrients. Whereas a sandy soil with not much clay or soil organic carbon will have a small bucket and won't be able to hold as much nutrition. And it's important to hold a lot of nutrition so we can feed our crops. So when I talk about that bucket, it refers to the amount of negatively charged spaces on our soil particles. So that is for our clay, we have negatively charged spaces, and for our soil organic carbon, we have both positive and negative charges, which means we can hold both positive and negative nutrients. So you can see here, soil organic carbon has a much bigger ability to hold those nutrients on the scale of 100 to 300 centimoles per kilo of soil organic matter. So that's quite high compared to some of our best clays. Some of our best clays can only hold 80 to 200 centimoles per kilo. Now, obviously, we do have a lot more clay in our soil, so the proportion of our CEC is going to come from our clay, but we can increase that with increasing our soil organic matter. So you can see here, at 1% soil organic carbon with a 20% clay soil, we have a CEC of 31.4. Now we can increase that by 21.9%, or an increase in our CEC by 6.9%. When we increase our soil organic carbon to 3%, so a 2% increase, we land with a CEC of 38.34 per kilo. So what does that mean? It means that our soil can effectively hold almost 22% more nutrition than previously. And what does that mean? It means that when we apply fertiliser, less of that is going to leach away. So we're going to lose less fertiliser and more of that is going to be available to our plant. Now this is very important for our anions, so our negatively charged nutrients, because our soil organic matter has positive charges, which means they're going to leach less. So things like boron, which exists as boric acid, sodium as sulfate, and nitrogen in its anion form as nitrate. All of these things are captured more on soil organic carbon than our clay, which means when we do apply sulfur or nitrogen or boric acid, those things are going to be kept in our soil for our plant. That's a massive benefit. The other massive benefit is balancing soil pH and EH. And so one of the best ways to talk about this is the concentration of hydrogen in our soil. We want to make sure that's within a range of around 6 to 7 pH in our soil. What soil organic matter does is buffers that pH. So say if we have a soil with a pH of 5, increasing our soil organic matter content will increase that towards our ideal 6 to 7 pH range. Now, it's important that we get our pH right because that influences a lot of biological and chemical processes, so such as nutrient availability. And in a similar way that pH does that to both biology and chemistry, EH or redox does the exact same thing. And redox is simply the thing of pH, but with electrons instead. So the potential for our electrons to exchange. And in a similar sense, our soil organic matter is able to poise, which is the fancy way of the fancy redox term for buffering the electrons. So in short, what does this mean? It means our soil environment is better chemically for our plants and microbes. Now, with both of these, we're going to increase the availability of our nutrients for our plant. And then on top of that, if our soil organic matter does decompose or break down, that's going to release more nutrients to our plants. So it can act as almost a natural fertiliser as well. Now, there's another chemical benefit that soil organic carbon brings to our soils, and that is buffering toxins. So toxins can include our herbicides, so things that we can apply, so herbicides, pesticides, and antibiotics. And so there's two ways that soil organic carbon can help buffer these toxins. The first one is actually breaking it down. So we have our toxin here. Our soil organic carbon is going to act as an energy source for our microbes to break that toxin down into components that are not toxic anymore. Or it can almost form a shield around the toxin and stabilize or deactivate that toxin so it doesn't hurt our plants and microbes in a similar sense. Now, obviously, this is important for the microbes and plants that we're not targeting with our herbicide and pesticide applications, and perhaps less beneficial for the organisms that we're trying to attack. Now, this does not mean that when we apply these things, they're not going to be effective anymore. Now, my understanding is that if you apply a humic substance with a herbicide or pesticide, it can actually increase the effectiveness of the herbicide or pesticide. You might have to look into that. I'm not recommending that, but I'm pretty sure there is some evidence to suggest it. Just do a trial first or something. I'm not taking any liability for your paddock. But anyways, when we do have high amounts of soil organic carbon in our soil, it can break down these things a lot faster, making sure that the plants that we do want to keep and the microbes that we do want can bounce back faster and aren't hurt by these applications. Next one is chelation of the nutrients that we want, as well as chelation of the metals that we don't want, so we can reduce the availability and uptake of those. So this refers to the uptake of these nutrients. So iron, zinc, copper, a lot of our metals, they can have trouble going into the plant root. So the plant can sometimes have difficulties absorbing those depending on EC. So if they're in an oxidized state, they can have trouble going into our plant. And so one way that we can increase the uptake is chelating these nutrients. So when we have high amounts of humus and soil organic matter in our soil, it chelates around the metal and it can increase the uptake into our plants. In a similar way, it can actually decrease the uptake of heavy metals and metals that we don't want. So lead, mercury, it reduces the uptake of those things. And finally, in our chemical benefits, we have this thing called water bridging. So water bridging is the attraction of water on our soil organic matter, so bridging our soil organic matter to a root, so that we can get a flow of our nutrients from one side of an area to the next. This increases the availability of the nutrients in a particular soil and allows that nutrient to flow towards our root. So it increases the efficiency of that process by having soil organic matter because it increases firstly the water holding capacity of our soil, so there's more water there for those nutrients to flow across, as well as that pathway for the ease of the nutrient to flow towards our root. Cool, so they're the chemical benefits, massive benefits there for our soil health, as well as reducing the things that we don't really want. And now for our biological benefits. So the number one and probably the biggest benefit we get from soil organic matter and humus is the increase of energy for our microbes. Specifically, when we talk about our dissolved soil organic matter, we're going to increase the activity and population of all our microbes. Mostly our beneficial microbes. We're going to increase the complexity of this soil food web so that we get more resilience to disease and variation in conditions. Now, when we increase activity and population, we're going to get more functionality out of our microbes. So we can increase all the benefits we get from our microbes. Now, humus specifically has a really interesting function where it can actually stabilize and deactivate enzymes in our soil. So it can reduce pathogen enzyme activity. And so the way this works is that if a pathogen wants to attack a plant, typically it'll send out enzymes to damage the, say, plant root so it can enter. What humus will do is actually form a barrier around these enzymes, stabilize them and deactivate them so that it doesn't attack our root. This can be really important for developing disease suppressive soils and reducing the impact of these pathogens on our roots. So this next one's a bit wooey, but it's scientifically proven in a few studies, and it's transmutation. Now, transmutation originally was like people wanted to convert, I think it was iron into gold, and so there was a whole line of chemistry aimed around that, but it didn't really go anywhere because it's almost impossible. However, microbes can actually do this with a number of different nutrients, and they found that when you apply humic substances with a particular set of microbes, you can actually convert sodium into a different number of elements. Potassium, for example, calcium, magnesium, and effectively it would actually involve binding two atoms together. So pretty cool. But anyways, in this study, they had a closed system. They applied humic acid. They applied these humic substances as well as these microbes. They measured before and after, and they found that there was a significant decrease in sodium and increase in potassium and other cations like that. So this can be important for increasing the availability of the nutrients we want, as well as decreasing nutrients that we have a abundance of. So sodium, for example, in sodic soils. And the reason why humic acid helps with that is it acts as that energy source for these microbes. Another study found that when you apply fulvic acid or humic substances as a seed coat to our seedlings, it increases germination rate and vigorous, as well as seedling growth. So if you want to increase the vigorous of your plants that you sow, the application of humic substances can really help with that. In a similar sense, the application onto roots increase root growth by 30 to 50%. So pretty good result. The application of humic substances in foliar sprays increased chlorophyll content, so increased photosynthesis in our plant, as well as ATP, so the ability for our plant to move energy around itself increased. This is a big impact because when we increase photosynthesis, the plant's going to have more carbohydrates to then pump back into the roots to stimulate more biological activity and more soil organic matter accumulation. Finally, humus and soil organic matter can actually be used by the plant to increase the plant energy levels, which the plant can then use for different metabolic processes. So some pretty amazing biological activities. Overall, it increases the amount of energy we have in our soil that our microbes and plants can use. Now, finally, I just want to touch on fertiliser. Fertiliser efficiency was found to increase with the application of humic substances in foliar sprays on the scale of 100 to 500% efficiency for NPK. That's a massive increase. So effectively, you could decrease your fertiliser to 50 to 20% of what it was originally. That's a massive benefit. And the reason why that works is because of that chelation aspect, and it increases the permeability of our leaves. So when the plant senses that there's fulvic acid or some of the other humic substances, it signals to the plant to increase the permeability of the leaves, allowing the nutrients to flow into the plant more. And finally, when the plant, they found that when you apply a humic substance or a carbon component of our soil in a soil applied fertiliser, it decreased the leaching, which means there's more nutrients there for the plant when it needs it, which also means we increase the efficiency of the fertilisers we apply. Likewise, we actually reduce our fertiliser applications because they're more efficient. All right, now for the financial benefits. So show me the money. So what I've done here is I've taken some of the benefits that we've gotten from the previous components, so the water holding capacity, or more specifically the plant available water holding capacity, done some calculations, looked at a fertiliser efficiency, and then worked out using some of the GRDC numbers what potentially the the financial benefit is, and some ACCUs or carbon credit calculations. So let's start off. We estimated that we could potentially increase our wheat yield. By the way, we're considering a increase from 1% to a 3% in the top 30 centimetres of our soil for a 3.5 tonne wheat crop. So that's kind of the context we're thinking in. So we can increase our wheat yield by about 8 kilos for every mil of water we have in our soil profile, which works out to be 470 kilos per hectare of wheat, which works out to be $188 per hectare, using $400 per hectare ish. A few studies suggest that we can actually increase our fertiliser efficiency by 30% by increasing our soil organic carbon in our soil. So this, as well as using humic substances in our foliar sprays, I think we can increase our efficiency of fertiliser by 30%, which means we can decrease our fertiliser inputs by 23% to ensure that basically they work out. So if we increase our efficiency, we can effectively decrease it. So roughly, fertiliser inputs for this tonnage of wheat is about $250. Now, if we were to decrease that by 23%, it's about $192.50, which means we're able to save about $57.50. So when we look at that compared to some of the other costs associated with the crop, so typically the variable cost for 3.5 tonnes of wheat is $604. With the increase in efficiency of our fertiliser, we're able to get that down to $546.50. But that's probably not where we make a lot of our money. It's more so in increasing the wheat production with increasing our water. So we're able to increase our yields to 3.97 tonnes, which means we've increased our revenue from $1,400 to $1,588. Now, that's revenue. Now, remember how I was saying a lot of the costs were actually more or less fixed with this example, because we still have to sow the exact same field, we're using the same seeds, we're harvesting all the same, like everything is basically the same, just changes in our fertiliser and the amount of yield we pull off per plant. So really, a lot of this actually drops straight to our bottom line. And that's what we see here. So the gross margin estimated from a typical crop was about almost $800. But when we increase our water holding capacity and fertiliser efficiency, we're able to get $1,041. What's interesting is that's actually a 30% increase in our gross margin, while only getting a 13% increase in our revenue. So we increased our revenue, but we also dropped our expenses. So we've got a much larger gross margin. Now, of course, this is just back of the envelope kind of calculations. Very inaccurate, I would say. But it's more important to understand the direction of this thing. If we increase our water holding capacity, we're going to increase our yields. If we're going to increase our fertiliser efficiency, we're going to need to either apply less, or we can keep the same amount and hopefully increase the quality of the, say, wheat, for example. We're going to increase the nitrogen or protein content. But all in all, we should be expecting, and we should only be doing this if we're going to get a financial benefit in the end. And that's what we really look at with consulting. We want to make sure we're getting a positive financial outcome at the end, because we don't want our farmers to go broke. So now onto our carbon credits. Carbon credits are pretty hot at the moment, and effectively you get a credit. You have to go into a program and everything, and there's a lot of regulations. We don't do anything in terms of baselining carbon credit programs. We can consult on the ways we think you can build soil organic carbon to achieve your ACCUs, but we don't baseline at all. So you have to ask someone else to do that. Effectively, in the program, you get one ACCU for every tonne of carbon dioxide emissions you've offset, which means if you store soil organic carbon as the carbon, you then increase. You've got to scale that to carbon dioxide offset. So here's the calculation. If we can increase our soil organic carbon by 0.1 point or percentage point. So I'm talking about going from 1.0 to 1.1 to 1.2. So not so much a percentage increase, but percentage increase. Does that make sense? Every year in soil organic carbon, we'll be able to build 4.2 tons of soil organic carbon. So we can capture 4.2 tons of carbon, which is equal to 15.4 tons of carbon dioxide into our soil per hectare, which is going to equal 15.4 ACCUs per hectare per year. Currently, or when I was recording this, the spot price is $33 each, which means each year you should be able to sequester $508 of carbon credits each year. Now, I don't know the costs associated with ACCUs. You got firstly, if you're going to be doing this in a cropping situation, the best way to do that is cover crops. So with cover crops, you got to buy the seed. That might cost $40 a hectare. You got to sow them. You need to terminate the cover crop. You also got to keep in mind, is the cover crop going to take away from your wheat yields? Are we going to be using up this water anyways? In which case, are we going to lose effectively this benefit? It really depends. And so you can't just look at that and go, oh, we're going to make $500 a hectare by sequestering carbon as well as our improved wheat yield. It really depends, and there's so many factors that go into it. There's also the admin costs of setting up a carbon credit program. There's also the soil organic carbon laboratory tests that you'll have to also pay for. So there are a lot of costs associated with this. So that's important to keep in mind. But in general, that could be something worth looking into. So this works out to be about $245 a hectare. There we go. If we were to scale this up across a 1,000 hectare farm, we're looking at a benefit of $245,000 across the farm. Seems like a very worthwhile investment to be looking at. So if that is interesting and you're interested in achieving some of these benefits, keep watching the course. It's for free. You can go to our website for a lot more detail. I've written up almost blog posts under each of the video contents. In the future, we'll have some downloadable templates and forms and summaries that you can get from this course. Make sure to keep watching future courses on how we're actually going to build this and make this actually reality. Finally, if you're a New South Wales farmer and interested in achieving some of these numbers or building soil organic carbon just for the environmental impact, get in contact with us and we can help you achieve that. Awesome. Thanks for watching. My name's Teal.